A billionaire comes home unannounced and freezes at what the black maid did to his twin children. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The mansion stood silent in the late afternoon light, a grand building draped in opulence and wealth. The kind of place where nothing ever felt out of place, where every corner was spotless, every object in its rightful place. But today, something was different. As the limousine pulled up to the driveway, the last person anyone expected to be standing at the front door was a young black woman, her small frame almost lost beneath the heavy apron she wore. She stood frozen, her eyes wide as the sound of tires on gravel echoed in the air. Behind her, the twin children of the billionaire played in the yard, laughing. Yet there was something in the air, something unsettling. The billionaire stepped out of the car, his heart beating faster than usual. He was not supposed to be home today. His schedule had been tight. Yet here he was, looking at the woman who had worked for him for years, someone who had always remained invisible in the background of his luxurious life. Today, she was doing something that froze him in his tracks. The maid, with her gentle hands, was not just folding laundry or scrubbing floors. No, she was sitting cross-legged on the ground, playing with his children. She was teaching them something far more important than any lesson he could provide: the art of kindness, the power of patience, and the strength of dignity. The twins, who had been so sheltered and pampered, were laughing as they played a game with her. He watched as she guided them, not with strict discipline or harsh words, but with the kind of warmth and respect he had never thought to give them himself. He had been so caught up in his business empire, in the demands of the world, that he had failed to see what truly mattered. As he stood at the doorstep, staring at the scene unfolding before him, a flood of emotions rushed through him. Shame, guilt, admiration, but most of all, confusion. Why was she, a maid, someone society often ignored and overlooked, capable of teaching his children something he had never managed to impart? He took a step forward, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes, but the moment his foot hit the ground, the children turned toward him. The smile on their faces faded, replaced by the kind of awkwardness only a child could show when they felt their world shift unexpectedly. His eyes met the maid's. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, but stood up slowly, her hands still clasped in front of her, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. It wasn't the smile of someone who expected praise or recognition. No, it was a quiet smile of understanding, as if she knew exactly what he was thinking. This wasn't just about the game. It was about something deeper, something that had been missing from this mansion for too long, something that his wealth and status had never provided. A lesson in humanity. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he ask her about this? How could he demand to know what she was doing, when it was clear that his children had learned more in one afternoon with her than in their entire lives surrounded by tutors, nannies, and wealth? The maid, still holding his children's hands, turned to face him fully. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but clear, "they were just teaching me to." And with those words, everything began to change. I never expected my life to change today, not like this. Standing at the door, the billionaire froze as the maid, his employee, stood in front of him, holding his twin children's hands, smiling with an expression of quiet understanding. He had walked in unannounced, certain that his children were in their usual routine of being pampered by their nannies. But this was something different, something he didn't understand. He had come to check on the house, the staff, and to make sure everything was in order. But what he found shook him to his core. The sight before him wasn't a simple domestic scene. It was an unexpected moment of connection, warmth, and kindness, something that had been missing in his life for so long. His mind raced. How could this woman, who had worked for him in silence for years, be the one to teach his children lessons he had never thought to give them? He felt a coldness creeping in, not from the weather outside, but from the realization that he had neglected what really mattered in life. The children, his pride and joy, the future of his family, had learned something today. And it wasn't from him. It wasn't from their expensive tutors or the private schools he sent them to. No, it was from this maid. the one who had always been invisible to him, the one he had never thought to acknowledge beyond the surface-level greetings. She had shown them something more valuable than all the riches in the world: true connection, patience, and the courage to stand tall in the face of challenges. He stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to do next. And then, with a calmness that stunned him, she spoke. "Sir, they were just teaching me to." The words hit him harder than he had expected. It wasn't just about the game. It was about the lessons she had taught them, the lessons they had taught her. It was about the exchange of respect, kindness, and understanding that transcended their roles. She wasn't just a maid. She was a teacher, a guide, someone who had shown his children what it truly meant to be human. The moment stretched, and in that silence, something inside him shifted. He had never thought to look at her that way before. She had always been the help, the one who cleaned and cooked and disappeared behind the scenes. He had never once considered what her life was like, what her story was. But today he saw her, truly saw her. She was not just an employee. She was a person, and in that moment, she had become something far more significant in his eyes. He had been so focused on his wealth, his status, his business empire, that he had failed to see the people who made all of this possible. She had been standing right there, quietly teaching his children, showing them something he had missed in all his years of success. The children, seeing the change in their father, began to look at him with curiosity. Their faces, once full of uncertainty and discomfort, softened as they realized their father was not the man they had once thought him to be. He wasn't just the man who bought them everything they wanted. He wasn't just the man who had everything figured out. No, he was something more. He was the man who could learn, the man who could change. The maid, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, turned to leave, but he stopped her with a simple, "Wait." She paused, looking at him with the same calm expression she had worn since the beginning. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse. She tilted her head slightly, a soft smile on her lips. "For what, sir?" she asked. "For teaching them what I couldn't," he replied. And in that moment, everything changed. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She had become a part of his family, a part of something he had taken for granted, something he hadn't even realized he was missing. He had always thought his children needed him to provide for them, to give them the best of everything. But now he understood. They needed something more, something that money couldn't buy. The air in the room felt lighter, the tension that had been there moments before slowly dissipating. The children, seeing the change in their father, smiled tentatively. It wasn't a perfect moment. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. But it was a beginning of something that would change all their lives forever. The billionaire watched as the maid left the room, her steps confident, her head held high. She wasn't just walking out the door. She was walking into a new chapter of her life, one where she would be seen for the person she truly was. And for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had seen something too. Something important, something real. I never expected the silence to feel so heavy. The following days after the incident with the maid were unlike any he had ever experienced. The billionaire had been overwhelmed by a strange combination of guilt and awe, emotions that were foreign to him in his high-powered, success-driven life. As he walked through his mansion, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his own neglect. Every corner of the house, every polished surface, felt like a reminder of the moments he had missed with his children. The luxury that surrounded him seemed empty now, devoid of the warmth he had long ignored. His children, twins who had been raised in this world of wealth and privilege, had spent more time with their tutors and nannies than with him. He had always been there for them in the most literal sense: money, luxury, opportunities. But there was something he had never given them, something that the maid, of all people, had shown them. He had been blind to it until now. She had given them something more important than the best schools or the finest clothes. She had given them heart. She had shown them the value of empathy, patience, and kindness, things that he, in all his wealth and success, had failed to impart. He had come to realize that these were the things his children truly needed from him. It wasn't just about providing for them. It wasn't just about protecting them from the harsh realities of the world. It was about teaching them to be good people. But that was where he had failed. As the days passed, the billionaire found himself reflecting on the maid's words, her calmness, her ability to guide his children without raising her voice. She had been more than just a caregiver. She had been a teacher. She had been someone who understood the importance of nurturing a child's heart and mind, not just their intellect or their material needs. The tension that had built up between him and his children slowly began to dissolve. He began to spend more time with them, not out of duty, but because he genuinely wanted to be there for them. He wanted to show them that he could be the father they needed, not just the provider they had known him to be. It wasn't easy. The walls of his mansion, the cold marble floors, the expensive decor, they all felt so out of place now. They were symbols of a life that had been built on the wrong priorities. But the twins responded differently to him now. The awkwardness had begun to fade, replaced with tentative smiles and moments of shared laughter. They no longer flinched when he entered the room, and instead, they would look up to him with curiosity and even affection. It was a small change, but it was everything. The maid's influence was still lingering in the air. Every time he looked at his children, he could see how much they had grown in just a few days, how their hearts were opening up to him in ways they hadn't before. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the twins asked if they could play a game. Normally, he would have declined, too busy with work or too distracted by his thoughts. But this time, he said yes. The game wasn't anything special, just a simple board game they had played many times before. But this time, it felt different. There was warmth in the air, a sense of connection that had been missing before. The billionaire found himself laughing along with them, not thinking about his meetings, his empire, or his next big investment. He was simply there, with his children, in the moment. It was a feeling he had never truly experienced before. As they played, he glanced up at the mantelpiece where a photo of the maid, her name now etched in his mind, stood beside a photo of his wife and children. It was a strange feeling, seeing her there, as part of their family. But in some ways, she had always been part of their lives. He had just never seen it before. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, the billionaire sat in his study, looking at the papers before him. His thoughts kept returning to the maid and her quiet strength. It was hard to believe that someone like her could make such an impact on him. He had built his entire life on wealth and success, but none of it had prepared him for the realization that true wealth was not about money. It was about the things that couldn't be bought: love, connection, kindness. And those were the things he had neglected for so long. The following morning, he called the maid into his office. She entered quietly, her expression as composed as ever. She was the same as she had always been, but somehow different. To him, she was no longer just the maid. She was a teacher, a guide, and, more than anything, someone who had opened his eyes to the importance of living with heart. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "For what, sir?" she asked, her tone as calm and respectful as always. He took a deep breath, unsure of how to put into words the gratitude he felt. "For showing me what really matters," he said. She smiled, a small, quiet smile that spoke volumes. "It was always inside you," she replied. And with that, the walls that had once existed between them began to fade completely. I sat quietly in my study, staring at the stacks of papers before me. The mansion, which had once felt like the pinnacle of success, now felt empty. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened over the past few days. My children, who had once been distant and cold toward me, were starting to open up. They were beginning to trust me, and I could see them learning what truly mattered in life. It wasn't the money, the luxury, or the fame. It was the warmth, the care, and the connections that really made a home. As I thought about this, I realized it was the maid who had made all of this possible. She had shown me the true meaning of family, of love, of kindness. I had always believed that I was doing enough for my children by providing them with everything they could ever want. But now, I saw that it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I needed to be there for them, not just as a provider, but as a father. The maid had taught them that, and she had taught me too. Her influence on them was undeniable. They had learned more from her in a few days than they had in years of being surrounded by nannies, tutors, and the best schools. It was a humbling realization. I had been blind to what truly mattered. It wasn't about the best education or the finest clothes. It was about emotional growth, about learning to be good people, about connecting with others on a deeper level. I had neglected that for too long. And it took the maid, someone I had once seen as just an employee, to show me that. I thought back to the conversation we had had the other day. I had thanked her for everything she had done, for teaching my children lessons that I should have been teaching them all along. She had smiled and told me that it was always inside me. I had never understood what she meant at the time, but now it made sense. I wasn't lost. I just needed to stop pretending that wealth and status could fill the emptiness inside. I needed to be present, to be real, to be the father they deserved. And that meant learning from her. It meant learning from someone who had nothing but still had everything: love, kindness, and an unwavering belief in the goodness of others. The next day, I found myself walking into the kitchen where she was preparing breakfast. I had told her I wanted to have a conversation, and I could feel the tension in the air. I wasn't sure what to say, but I knew I had to say something. As I approached, she looked up, and our eyes met. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the powerful billionaire who could control everything. I felt like a man who had a lot to learn. She smiled softly, as if she had known this moment would come. "Sir, how can I help you?" she asked, her tone calm and respectful. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I just wanted to thank you again. For everything," I said, my voice low. She tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "You've already thanked me," she said gently. "But I think you're here for something else." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't about gratitude. It wasn't about a simple thank you. It was about a deeper understanding, a shift in how I viewed the world and the people in it. "I've been blind to a lot of things," I admitted, my voice rough with emotion. "I thought I could buy everything for my children, but I see now that I was wrong. I see that I was missing the most important thing." She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, waiting, her eyes full of understanding. "I need to be more than just a provider," I continued. "I need to be a father. I need to be there for them. And I need to learn how to love them the way they need to be loved." She nodded, her smile softening. "You've already started," she said quietly. "The fact that you're here, asking these questions, that means you're already on the right path." I felt a lump in my throat as her words sank in. She wasn't just teaching my children. She was teaching me too. She had been the guide I never knew I needed. And in that moment, I realized that I was no longer the same person who had walked into this house years ago. I had learned something that money couldn't buy. I had learned what it meant to be a father, to be a man who could admit his mistakes and try to make things right. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I could truly change, whether I could truly be the father my children deserved. But I was determined to try. I owed it to them. I owed it to her. That evening, after dinner, I found myself sitting with the twins. We weren't talking about anything important. It was just simple conversation, the kind of conversation I had never taken the time to have with them before. And for the first time, it felt natural. It felt right. The silence that had once existed between us was gone. It was replaced by a sense of connection, a sense of family. As I looked at them, I realized that I had finally begun to understand what it meant to be their father. And it wasn't just about providing for them. It was about being there for them, listening to them, guiding them with the same patience and kindness that the maid had shown them. The next morning, I called her into my office. She entered quietly, just like she always did, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone I respected, someone I admired. "Thank you," I said again, my voice thick with emotion. "You've changed my life. You've changed all of our lives." She smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You're welcome, sir," she said, her voice as calm as ever. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. I sat in the grand dining room, the faint clink of silverware filling the air as the twins finished their meal. It was a moment I never thought I would experience, a quiet evening, together, as a family. The mansion, which had once felt like a prison of luxury and coldness, now felt more like a home. The walls that had separated us were slowly crumbling, and in their place, a new sense of connection and understanding was growing. I looked across the table at my children, their faces brighter, more open than I had seen in years. There was a tenderness in their eyes, an unspoken trust that was slowly forming. I could tell they were beginning to see me not just as a provider, but as someone they could turn to. This shift had come slowly, and it wasn't without its struggles. But I had learned that change took time, patience, and, above all, willingness. I had been so blinded by my wealth and success that I had never realized how much I had neglected the most important relationships in my life. Now, as I sat at this table, I realized that the journey I had begun was far from over. It was just the beginning, and there was still so much more to learn. The maid had been the catalyst for this change, though she had never intended to be. She had simply done what she did best: care for others. She had cared for my children in a way I hadn't, and in the process, she had shown me what it truly meant to be a father. I had come to respect her, to admire her strength and grace. But as the days passed, I realized that I needed to do more than just respect her. I needed to show her that I valued her not just as an employee, but as a person. I needed to acknowledge her for all the ways she had shaped our lives without ever asking for recognition. It wasn't just about thanking her anymore. It was about showing her that she had a place in our family, a place she had earned with her unwavering dedication. I called her into the living room that evening. She entered quietly, as always, her expression calm and composed. There was a softness in her demeanor now, a quiet confidence that had come from the trust we had built together. "You wanted to talk to me, sir?" she asked, her voice steady but warm. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "I just wanted to say," I began, my voice faltering for a moment, "that I appreciate everything you've done for me, for the children. But more than that, I appreciate you, for the person you are." She stood still for a moment, her eyes meeting mine. There was a brief silence before she spoke, her voice as calm as ever. "I'm just doing my job, sir," she said softly. "I'm doing what I was hired to do." I shook my head, my heart heavy with emotion. "It's more than that," I said, my voice thick with sincerity. "You've done more than just take care of us. You've shown us how to be better, how to care for each other. You've taught my children lessons that I should have been teaching them all along." She looked down for a moment, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I don't need thanks, sir," she said quietly. "I'm just happy to help." I felt a pang in my chest at her words. She was so humble, so selfless, and yet she had given so much of herself to us. It was clear that she didn't expect anything in return. But that made me more determined to show her that she deserved more than just gratitude. She deserved respect, recognition, and, above all, a place in our lives. "I want you to know," I said, my voice steady now, "that you are a part of this family. You've always been a part of this family, and I want to make sure you know that you're valued, not just as an employee, but as someone who has changed our lives for the better." Her eyes softened at my words, and I saw a flicker of something in her gaze, surprise, perhaps, or relief. But before she could respond, the twins came running into the room, their faces alight with excitement. "Dad, we're going to play outside," they exclaimed. I smiled, my heart full. "I'll be right there," I said, turning back to the maid. "I just wanted you to know how much you've impacted us. Thank you for everything." She nodded, a small, grateful smile playing at her lips. "You're welcome, sir," she replied, her voice soft but full of meaning. As the children ran outside, I watched them for a moment, feeling a warmth spread through me. It was strange to think that just a few days ago, I had been a stranger to them, and now, we were building something new together. A family, a real family. And I couldn't have done it without her. The maid had given us more than just her time and her care. She had given us a lesson in humanity, in love, and in connection. And I was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be a father, to be a family man. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, there would be moments of doubt. But I knew now that I wasn't walking this path alone. I had my children by my side. And, in a way, I had the maid too. Someone who had taught me the greatest lesson of all, that the most important things in life can't be bought. They can only be earned, with love, respect, and the willingness to be vulnerable. I smiled to myself, knowing that this was just the beginning. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready for what came next. I woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The mansion was quieter than usual, and yet it no longer felt as empty. My children were upstairs, still sleeping soundly, and I couldn't help but smile at the thought of how far we had come in such a short time. The maid's influence was still heavy in the air, and I could feel it shifting me, changing me, in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about spending more time with my children or providing them with lessons. It was about learning from them as well. The realization that I was no longer just a father, but someone who had to earn the right to be called a father, was humbling. But it was a lesson I needed to learn, and one that I had no intention of forgetting. I moved around the house, slowly, deliberately, trying to soak in the new atmosphere that was slowly taking shape. It wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it felt real. And that, I realized, was the most important thing. I found myself in the kitchen a little later that morning. The maid was there, as usual, preparing breakfast for the children. There was a calmness about her, a quiet strength that made her presence feel like an anchor in the storm of my emotions. She turned when I walked in, a slight smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Good morning, sir," she greeted me, her voice warm but measured. I nodded in return, but I couldn't quite find the words. Everything felt so different now. She had become more than just the help, more than just someone I had paid to take care of my home. She had become a teacher, a guide, someone who had opened my eyes to the things I had been missing in my life. I sat down at the table, watching her as she moved about the kitchen. There was a simplicity to her movements, a grace in the way she handled the mundane tasks of everyday life. It was clear she didn't do it for recognition or reward. She did it because it was what needed to be done, and she did it with an integrity that was rare, especially in the world I had spent so many years in. I took a deep breath and finally found the words. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began, my voice quiet but steady. She didn't stop what she was doing, but I could tell she was listening. About how we have to live with heart. About how we need to do more than just provide. "You were right." She turned then, meeting my gaze. "I wasn't trying to tell you how to live, sir," she said softly, but I could see the sincerity in her eyes. "I just think sometimes we forget what really matters." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I didn't just want to be a provider, I continued, more to myself than to her. I wanted to be a father. I wanted to be there for my children, to teach them the things that really matter. She gave me a small smile, a smile that held more understanding than I could ever have imagined. "You're learning," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That's all anyone can do. And in that moment, I realized how true that was. I had spent so many years trying to be perfect, trying to control everything around me, but it wasn't perfection that my children needed. It was realness. It was love, patience, and understanding. The kind of love that didn't come with conditions or expectations, but simply existed because it was the right thing to do. I spent the next few hours with my children, playing games, reading stories, and just talking. I felt more connected to them than I had in years. It wasn't about the money, the privileges, or the status. It was about being together, truly together, as a family. We sat outside later that afternoon, enjoying the warm sun, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. For the first time in my life, I was able to see the value in the simple things, things I had long overlooked. The maid had shown me that. I had spent so much of my life focusing on what I could give my children, thinking that if I provided for them in every material way, it would be enough. But I had been wrong. It was the moments like these, the ones that couldn't be bought, that would shape their futures. I looked over at her, standing by the door, watching us. She didn't need to be involved in every moment, but I could tell she was content just knowing that we were finally learning the lessons she had been trying to teach us all along. "You've done more than I could ever thank you for," I said, standing up and walking over to her. She looked at me, her expression soft but resolute. "I'm just doing what needs to be done, sir," she replied, and I could hear the humility in her voice. But I knew better now. It wasn't just about doing what needed to be done. It was about doing it with heart, with care, and with purpose. And she had done that. She had done it every single day, not just for me, but for my children and for herself. "I want you to know," I continued, my voice steady, "that you're not just the maid here. You're a part of this family. You always have been." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes. But before she could respond, the twins ran up to us, giggling. "Can we go play again?" they asked, their faces alight with excitement. I smiled, nodding. "Of course," I said. "Go ahead, I'll be right there." As they ran off, I turned back to her, a feeling of deep appreciation welling up inside me. "Thank you," I said again, this time with more meaning. "You've changed everything." She smiled softly, nodding. "No, sir. You've changed everything." And with that, I realized just how much I had learned in such a short time. It wasn't just the children who had changed. I had changed too, and it was because of her. I woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity that had been missing for so long. The events of the past week had left me unsettled, but they had also opened my eyes to the way I had been living, detached from the people I loved, focused solely on my work and wealth. The children had begun to trust me, and I was slowly starting to understand what they needed, what I had been too blind to see before. But as much as I had changed, there was still something more that needed to be done. The maid had left an indelible mark on me. She had shown me the truth, not just about my children, but about myself. She had become more than just an employee. She was a quiet force of transformation, and her impact was undeniable. I had come to respect her not just as a caregiver, but as a guide, a mentor, and perhaps even a mirror of the qualities I lacked. But now, I had to make sure that her presence in our lives was truly valued, not just by me, but by the children as well. That evening, after dinner, I decided it was time for a conversation. The children were in their rooms, finishing their homework, and I was alone in the living room. The maid entered quietly, as she always did, her presence a calming influence in the otherwise quiet space. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, but I could hear the faintest hint of curiosity in it. "Is everything all right?" I nodded, standing up to face her. "I wanted to talk," I began. "I need to ask something important." She remained still, her eyes locking with mine, waiting for me to continue. "You've changed everything for us," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've taught us so much, more than I ever expected. But there's something I need you to know. I want to make sure you understand just how much I appreciate everything you've done for my family." She tilted her head slightly, her calm demeanor unchanged, but I could see that my words had struck a chord with her. "You don't need to thank me, sir," she replied quietly. "I'm just doing my job." I shook my head, stepping closer. "It's not just your job," I said firmly. "You've done more than what's expected. You've given us something we didn't know we needed. Something that goes beyond any contract or payment. And I want you to know that you're an important part of this family. You always have been." The words were out, and I could feel a weight lifting from my chest. It wasn't enough just to acknowledge her work. I needed to acknowledge her as a person. She had been so much more than just the maid in this house, and it was time she knew it. For a moment, she just stood there, her expression softening. "I appreciate you saying that, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you should know that this," she gestured to the house, to the space around us, "was always about helping, not about recognition." I nodded, understanding the humility in her words, but I couldn't let this moment pass. "It's not just about helping," I said. "It's about being part of something, being seen, and being valued. You've done that for us. You've done that for me." I could see the faintest flicker of surprise in her eyes. She wasn't expecting this, and that made me realize just how much I had taken her for granted. How much I had taken everyone for granted. I had spent so long assuming that my wealth and status could solve everything, that I never paused to consider the people who were actually making a difference in our lives. The maid, with her quiet strength, had taught me a lesson that no amount of money or success could have ever taught me. As we stood there in the living room, I realized how much I needed her presence in our lives. It wasn't just for the children's benefit. It was for mine too. I had learned from her that true strength wasn't about dominance or control. It was about the ability to listen, to learn, to care for others without expecting anything in return. And that was a lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my life. But there was still one thing left to do. The children. They had already begun to change. But they needed to see this transformation too. They needed to see that their father was no longer just the man who provided for them, but the man who cared for them, who learned from them, who was part of their lives in a real, meaningful way. I couldn't just tell them about these changes. I needed to show them. The next day, after school, I gathered the twins in the living room. I could see the wariness in their eyes, the lingering doubt that I had always been distant, always too busy for them. But this time, I was going to change that. I wanted them to see who I was now, to see that I was not the same man who had been absent for so long. "I know I haven't been the father I should have been," I began, my voice steady but full of emotion. "But I want you both to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. For you. For this family." They looked at me in silence, their faces unreadable, but I could see something in their eyes. It wasn't skepticism this time. It was curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, it was hope. "I'm here for you," I continued, my voice unwavering. "Not just as your father, but as someone who wants to learn and grow with you. I want us to be a family, really be a family." The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I could feel the shift, the change in the air, as if the walls between us were slowly coming down. And then, to my surprise, the twins smiled. It wasn't a huge smile, but it was enough. Enough to show me that they were beginning to believe me. And as I watched them, I realized that this journey was just beginning. I had a lot to make up for, and it wouldn't be easy. But with each small step, we were moving towards something better. Something real. The maid had helped us get here, and now it was up to me to make sure we kept moving forward, together. I woke up the next morning with a sense of urgency I had never felt before. There was a shift in the air, something that had been quietly building within me for days. The children, my twins, had finally begun to open up to me. They no longer looked at me with distant eyes, hesitant and unsure of the man I had become. But now, I realized that the changes we had made together, the lessons we had started to learn, needed to be more than just fleeting moments. We were moving towards something bigger, something deeper, but the road ahead wouldn't be easy. And there were still obstacles to face. As I sat in the living room, thinking about everything, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was looming just beyond the horizon. It wasn't just the shifts within my family. It was the challenges I hadn't yet addressed. The house was quieter these days, but it still felt like there were pieces missing, pieces that I had never fully acknowledged before. The maid had helped me find those pieces. Her presence in our lives had already changed so much, but now, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen when those outside forces I couldn't control, started to notice. I had already seen how people in my life reacted to the changes. They didn't understand. They didn't see what was happening in this house, in this family, and that made me uneasy. There were still people who viewed the maid as nothing more than a servant, someone whose value was determined solely by her job. But I knew better now. She had taught me that, and I wouldn't let her, or anyone else, be devalued again. It was time to face the people in my life who might try to tear apart everything we had worked for. The next day, I called a family meeting. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say, but I knew that it was time for all the truths to come out. The maid? No, I had to stop thinking of her that way, had become part of our family. And it was time for everyone to understand that. The twins were nervous when they entered the room. They had seen the tension in the air. They had always been able to sense when things weren't quite right. But this time, I hoped they wouldn't be afraid. This was about showing them that we were stronger than we had ever been. The maid entered quietly, as always. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around uncertainly, like she used to. It was clear she knew her place now. But I also knew that it was time for her to see that she belonged here. This was her home too. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. The children looked up at me, their faces full of questions, and I could see the curiosity in their eyes. I know things have been different lately. I began, my voice steady. And I know you've noticed changes. The way we spend time together, the way we interact, it's all part of something that we're building as a family. But there's something important I need to say, something that I should have said a long time ago. The room was silent as I took a deep breath. This house, this family, is not just about wealth, about what we have or what we can buy. It's about love. It's about understanding. And it's about the people who make this place what it is. I looked over at the maid, who stood by the door, her expression calm and accepting, but I could see the hint of vulnerability in her eyes. You've taught me more than I could have ever learned on my own, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You've shown me what it means to truly care for someone, to give of yourself without expecting anything in return. And for that, I am grateful. The children glanced at each other, their faces full of surprise. I could tell they weren't sure what to make of this. I hadn't talked like this before. I had always kept my emotions close, hidden behind the walls of my wealth and success. But now, those walls were coming down, and I was letting them see me for who I truly was. Imperfect, flawed, but ready to change. I know that you've been an important part of our lives for a long time, but I want you to know that it's not just about the work you do for us. You are part of this family, just as much as anyone else. And I want you to know that we see you for who you are, not just for the role you play in this house. The maid's eyes softened, and I could see the relief in her gaze. She didn't need my validation, but it was important for me to give it to her. She had become so much more than I had ever realized. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice full of gratitude. But there was something else in it, something that told me she had been waiting for this moment, for me to truly see her. And I did. I really did. The twins were still quiet, processing what had just been said. But I could tell something had shifted in them too. They were starting to understand that things were different now, and that their father was different. We were all changing together, and it was terrifying and beautiful all at once. There was still so much work to do. We had just begun to lay the foundation for a new family dynamic, one that was based on more than just material wealth. It was based on something deeper. It was based on love, understanding, and respect. The children would still need time to adjust, but I knew we were on the right path. The maid had opened my eyes, and now it was my turn to open the eyes of the people around me. We weren't just a family because of our blood or our last names. We were a family because we cared for each other, because we supported one another, and because we chose to be there for each other, no matter what. And with that, I knew that we could face whatever came next. The challenges would come, but we would face them together, stronger than we had ever been before. I woke up the next morning feeling like the air had shifted in some profound way. The house was quieter than usual, but there was a sense of warmth that hadn't been there before. It was a strange thing to realize, that something so simple as an honest conversation, a few words of truth, could change everything. The children, my twins, were upstairs finishing their breakfast. They weren't the same children they had been just a few weeks ago. Their eyes were more open, their smiles less guarded. I had seen them start to trust me again, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the maid, for her steady presence in our lives, and for the lesson she had taught me without even realizing it. I had spent so much time focusing on what I could provide for my children, material things, security, comfort, but I had neglected what truly mattered. It wasn't the expensive cars, or the private schools, or the elaborate vacations. It was the moments of connection, the shared experiences, the simple act of being present in each other's lives. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was learning how to do that. I was learning how to be the father they needed. But I also knew that it wasn't going to be easy. The outside world, the world of high society, of business, was still there. It still had its expectations, its judgments, its pressures. I had to navigate those while trying to rebuild my family, and it wasn't going to be smooth sailing. I could feel the weight of that as I walked through the house that morning, thinking about everything. The maid had become more than just someone who took care of things around here. She had become part of the fabric of our family. But not everyone would see it that way. There were still people in my life who viewed her as just the help, who didn't understand the bond we had formed. And that made me nervous. It wasn't about the maid herself, it was about the world around us. The world that saw people like her as invisible. The world that didn't understand the value of someone who cared, truly cared, for others. The world that would never appreciate her for what she had done. But I couldn't let that stop me. I couldn't let the opinions of others dictate what was right for my family. And so, I made a decision. I had to bring everyone together. Family, friends, the people in my life who would shape our future, and show them what had happened here, in this house. I needed to show them what the maid had brought to our lives. The kids were nervous when I told them what I was planning. They had grown up in a world that valued appearances, that valued status, and now, I was asking them to accept something new. To accept someone new. But I could see in their eyes that they were ready. They had seen the change in me, in us. And they knew, deep down, that this was the right thing to do. Later that afternoon, I gathered everyone in the living room. The maid, as always, stood quietly in the background, unsure of her place. I could tell. She didn't expect to be at the center of this conversation, but I wanted her to be. She was the reason we were all here. The children sat on the couch, their eyes wide with curiosity. They had been through so much, so quickly, and I knew this would be another big step for them. The room felt heavy with anticipation. But I was ready. I cleared my throat and looked around the room, meeting everyone's eyes. I know we've been through a lot lately, I began. There's been a lot of change in this house. But I want to be clear about one thing. The person standing in this room today, I gestured toward the maid, who looked at me with wide eyes, unsure of what I was about to say, has taught me more than I could have ever learned on my own. She has shown me what it means to truly care for others, what it means to show up when it matters most. She's not just someone who works here. She is a part of our family, and I want everyone to understand that. There was a long pause. The children looked at me with surprise, their faces a mixture of confusion and understanding. But I could see something else too, something more. There was a shift happening, a quiet change that would set the course for everything to come. Slowly, my closest friend, who had been silent up until this point, spoke up. "I don't get it," he said, his voice hesitant. "I mean, I get that she's helped out a lot, but isn't she just doing her job?" I shook my head. "No, she's done more than her job. She's taught my children what it means to be kind, to be compassionate. She's shown them what it really means to be a family." I could see the doubt in his eyes, the skepticism. But I also saw something else, the beginning of understanding. The children, sensing the shift in the air, slowly started to speak. "She's really nice," my son said, his voice a little uncertain but genuine. "She helps us when we're sad." My daughter nodded. "She doesn't just tell us what to do. She shows us." Their words were simple, but they carried weight. The room was silent for a moment, and then my friend looked at me and nodded. "Okay, I see it now," he said quietly. "I hadn't realized. You're right. She's part of your family, and I respect that." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. This wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. The maid, standing by the door, was no longer just someone in the background. She was part of the conversation, part of this new family dynamic. And slowly, everyone in the room was starting to see it. The change had begun, and there was no going back. The rest of the evening was quieter than usual. The tension had been broken, but there was still much to be done. Still, I felt a sense of hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. This was just the beginning. And for the first time, I felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The children were finally starting to believe in this new family we were building, and I knew that together, we could face anything. I sat at my desk, the weight of the day finally starting to settle in. I had expected some resistance, some pushback from those who couldn't understand the changes that were happening in our house. But as I reflected on everything that had transpired over the past week, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The kids, who had once been distant, were now full of life. They weren't just smiling for the sake of it. They were actually happy, and I could see the shift in their eyes. The maid, now a permanent fixture in our lives, had been the catalyst for this change. She had taught me something I could never have learned from the textbooks or the conferences or the business meetings. She had shown me that a family isn't just built on what you give, but on how you make people feel. It was her kindness, her unwavering belief in doing the right thing, that had transformed my world. I walked through the house that afternoon, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. The staff was finishing their duties, and the children were in their rooms, probably doing their homework or just talking to one another. I couldn't remember the last time we had just talked like that, without the usual walls of silence and distance that I had allowed to build up over the years. When I entered the living room, the twins looked up, their faces lighting up when they saw me. They were no longer the withdrawn kids I had once known. They greeted me with excitement, and I could tell they were looking forward to spending time with me. It felt natural, like something that should have always been there, but had been missing for far too long. We sat down together and started talking. The conversation wasn't anything profound. It was about school, about their friends, about what they wanted to do over the weekend. But in the simplicity of that moment, I realized how much I had taken for granted. I had spent years thinking that I needed to be busy, that I had to focus on work and the future to provide for them. But what they truly needed wasn't money. It was my time, my attention, my presence. And for the first time, I was able to give that to them. The maid came into the room shortly afterward, quietly standing by the door, as she always did. She had become such an integral part of our lives, but she still carried herself with the humility of someone who had never asked for recognition. I looked at her and saw someone entirely different from the woman who had first walked into this house. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone I could never repay, no matter how much wealth I had. She had shown me how to be human again. "I wanted to ask you something," I said, turning to her. "What do you see when you look at this family now?" She paused, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in a way that was more meaningful than any of our past conversations. "I see a family that is finally starting to see each other," she replied softly. "And I see you, sir, becoming the father they need." I felt a lump form in my throat. It wasn't just the children who needed me. I needed them too. I needed to be their father, not just their provider. And I was finally starting to understand that. She smiled at me, her expression full of understanding, and then she quietly stepped back, allowing us to continue our moment. I could feel the shift in the room, in my heart, and in my children's eyes. There was no more pretending, no more hiding behind the walls I had built for myself. I was here, truly here, and I was ready to be the father my children deserved. But then, just as I thought everything was moving in the right direction, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I wondered if this was just another interruption in what had been such a peaceful afternoon. I walked toward the door, my heart still racing from the emotions of the last few minutes. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with a person I hadn't seen in years, my business partner, who had always been more of a mentor to me than a colleague. He was standing there, looking at me with an unreadable expression on his face. "I came to talk," he said simply. I motioned for him to come in, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to mask the anxiety in my voice. "There's something you need to know," he said, stepping inside. "We've been looking at your company's performance, and frankly, there are some concerns. People are talking, and it's starting to affect the bottom line." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had worked so hard to build my empire, to provide for my family, and now, it seemed like all of it was starting to unravel. "What do you mean?" I asked, my mind racing. "People are questioning your decisions," he said, his voice tight. "There's talk of you becoming too distracted, of your focus shifting. You need to get things back on track, or it could cost you everything." I felt the weight of his words settle in my chest. I had never felt more vulnerable. The business I had worked so hard to build was now at risk. But as I stood there, I realized something. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of losing everything, because I knew that what I had found with my children, with the maid, was worth more than anything money could buy. I could lose the company, but I couldn't lose my family. And that, I realized, was where my true strength lay. "I'll take care of it," I said, my voice firm. "But my priorities are different now. Family comes first. Always." My business partner didn't say anything for a moment. He just nodded, as if he understood something he hadn't before. "I get it," he said. "But remember, you're walking a fine line." I nodded, but inside, I knew I was no longer walking that line alone. I had my family now, and that was enough. I had hoped that the tension between the new direction my family was heading and the demands of the business world would ease after the conversation with my partner. But the days following were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and decisions that weighed on me more heavily than they ever had before. It wasn't just the business that was at stake anymore. It was the life I had started building, the fragile sense of connection that had started to grow between me and my children, and between all of us and the woman who had transformed our world. I couldn't help but feel that I was standing at a crossroads. On one side, there was the corporate empire I had spent my entire life building, the thing that had given me purpose, security, and status. On the other side, there was the family I was rediscovering, the raw, unpolished, vulnerable version of what it meant to truly love and be loved. The decision wasn't easy. The business needed my attention. I had invested so much of myself into it that pulling away, even just a little, felt like a betrayal of everything I had worked for. But when I looked at my children, when I saw the openness in their eyes that hadn't been there before, when I realized how far they had come in such a short time, I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my empire. I wasn't just a father when I had the time for it. I was a father, period. And I needed to be present. The shift in priorities wasn't just a change in how I spent my time. It was a change in how I viewed myself and what I wanted to stand for. I had been so caught up in the pursuit of success, in the relentless push to climb higher and higher, that I had forgotten to enjoy the view. I had forgotten to appreciate the people in my life who mattered most. But now, I was beginning to see clearly. I had built the life I thought I wanted. But what I truly wanted was something more meaningful, something real. And for the first time, I could see how the pieces were falling into place. The next day, I made a decision. I called a meeting with my top executives and informed them that I would be stepping back from my role in the company, at least for the time being. I couldn't do both anymore, not the way I had been doing them. I needed to focus on what mattered most. At first, there was resistance. People didn't understand. They thought I was making a mistake, putting my personal life before the business. And maybe they were right. But in that moment, I realized that if I didn't make this change now, I would lose the very things I was trying to protect. I couldn't allow myself to keep sacrificing the most important people in my life for something that wasn't even bringing me happiness anymore. When the meeting ended, I felt a strange sense of relief, but also a deep sense of uncertainty. There were still people who didn't understand, who would continue to question my decision. But I couldn't control that. All I could control was what I chose to value, what I chose to fight for. And I had chosen to fight for my family. The days that followed were filled with adjustments. I spent more time with the twins, helping them with their homework, talking about their day, and listening to their dreams. It wasn't just about being there physically. It was about being present emotionally, about letting them know that I was there for them, not just as a father, but as someone who was learning alongside them. We did simple things, played games, went on walks, had dinner together without distractions. And slowly, something in all of us began to heal. But there was still work to be done. I couldn't erase the years of distance, the years of silence between us. But I was committed to making up for lost time. I couldn't fix everything in a day, but I could start by showing up every day. I had been so focused on trying to control everything that I had missed the most important part of life: connection. The maid, the woman who had changed everything, had shown me what it meant to truly care, to give of yourself without expecting anything in return. She had been a mirror for me, reflecting back the person I had once been and reminding me of the person I could become. And now, I saw her in a new light, not just as someone who worked in our home, but as someone who had earned a place in our family. The twins, too, were beginning to see the change in me. They were opening up more, asking questions, sharing their thoughts in a way they hadn't before. It was like they had been waiting for me to finally show up, and now that I was, they were ready to trust me. But it wasn't just them. I was learning to trust too. To trust that I didn't have to have everything figured out. To trust that the love and support I had always given them, even when I wasn't physically present, was enough. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape the future, and I was ready to shape it with them. The maid had started coming into the living room in the evenings after the children had gone to bed. She had been hesitant at first, unsure of her place in this new dynamic, but I had insisted that she be part of our family, just as much as anyone else. She sat quietly, listening as we talked, and occasionally joining in. It wasn't just about the children anymore. It was about us. It was about creating something new together, something that was built on love, understanding, and respect. That evening, as I sat with the maid and the children, I realized that everything had changed. The walls that had separated us were gone. We were no longer living in isolation, separated by unspoken words and unresolved feelings. We were living in a home, a real home, where everyone had a place, where everyone was seen and heard. And for the first time in a long time, I felt complete. I had thought the hardest part was behind us, that the most difficult decisions had already been made. But as the days went on, I realized that change, real change, never happens overnight. The house was quieter than it had ever been, and not just because of the absence of tension. It was a different kind of quiet, one filled with the hum of new beginnings. But it wasn't just the physical environment that had shifted. It was something deeper, something that was growing between all of us, though it wasn't always easy to acknowledge. The twins were doing better. There was no denying that. Their laughter, which had once been rare, now echoed through the halls of the mansion. They had begun to open up, share more, and trust me in ways that I had never thought possible. And yet, even with all the progress we had made, I felt like we were still standing on the edge of something, as if we hadn't quite crossed the threshold into the new life we were building. The maid, who had become such a key figure in our transformation, seemed to sense it too. There was a distance in her eyes these days, a certain hesitancy. I had asked her to stay, to be part of our new family dynamic, but I could tell that she still wasn't sure of her place. She had never sought recognition, never expected anything from us. She had always been selfless, and her strength lay in the quiet way she did things. But I knew that if we were to truly move forward, we needed to address the unspoken things between us. She had been a catalyst for change, and I couldn't let her fade into the background now. It was time for me to take a step, to show her that her role in our lives was as important as anyone else's. Later that week, I found her in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She moved with her usual calm efficiency, but today, there was something different in the air. I walked in slowly, unsure of how to start. I had so much I needed to say, but the words felt heavy. Finally, I spoke. "You've been incredible," I said, my voice steady but soft. She looked up at me, surprised. "I don't know if I've said this enough, but I'm grateful for you. You've done more for us than you know." She placed the knife she had been using down on the counter and met my gaze, her eyes wide with something that looked like disbelief. I've only done my job, she replied quietly. I shook my head, stepping closer. It's not just your job, I said firmly. It's everything you've done. You've given us something we never knew we needed. You've helped me see my children for who they truly are, and you've shown me what it means to be a family. She looked down at the counter, her hands still. I just wanted to help, she said, her voice almost a whisper. I could tell she didn't quite believe that it was enough, that she had truly made such a difference. You've done more than help, I insisted. You've changed everything. I can't imagine where we would be without you. The silence between us stretched, thick with all the words I hadn't known how to say. I don't know how to make it right, I continued. But I want you to know that you're part of this family. You always have been. She met my gaze, her eyes searching mine, as if looking for any sign that I truly meant it. After a long pause, she nodded. Thank you, she said simply, her voice still soft but sincere. That means more to me than you know. I felt a weight lift from my chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I had taken a step, and now it was her turn to see herself the way we saw her. Not as someone who just worked here, but as someone who had earned a place in our lives, in our hearts. Over the next few weeks, I continued to spend time with the children, making an effort to be there in ways I had never been before. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still moments where the old habits, the old ways of thinking, tried to creep back in. But every day, it felt like we were getting closer. The twins were growing more confident, more open, and I could see the change in their faces. They were learning to trust me, and I was learning to trust them. I began to realize that it wasn't just about showing up anymore. It was about listening, really listening to them. And I saw the same shift in the maid. She wasn't just doing the work anymore, not just taking care of the house. She had become an active participant in our family, someone who was not only seen, but heard. Her presence was no longer a quiet background hum. It was a steady heartbeat that held us together. And yet, I couldn't ignore the fact that something still felt incomplete. There were still people in my life who didn't understand, who questioned my choices. My business partner had been quiet since our last conversation, but I knew that the real test was still ahead. I couldn't just change how I viewed the world. I had to show everyone else that the shift in priorities was real. The next evening, as I sat with my children and the maid, I could feel the weight of what needed to be done. It wasn't enough to just be a father in this house, to just be a husband, a provider. I had to stand by my decisions, even if that meant facing the people who didn't understand. And so, I made a plan. I would invite the people who mattered most into our home, the people who still didn't see the changes that had taken place, and show them what we had built, show them what real family meant. It wouldn't be easy, but it was time to make sure that what we had was more than just a temporary shift. It was time for everyone else to see what I had seen, what we had all seen, and to recognize the value of what we had together. I had spent so much time focusing on what I thought was important that I hadn't realized the weight of everything that had been building up beneath the surface. The change in our family dynamic, the transformation I had been going through, hadn't come without its challenges. There were still people in my life who didn't understand, who didn't see what I saw. I had to face the truth. The people who mattered most still had doubts about the choices I had made. It wasn't just about providing for my children or giving them everything they wanted. It was about being present, being there emotionally, and most importantly, being a father. A real father. The kind of father I had always hoped I would be, but never had the time to become. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The house had changed, and so had I. The maid, who had become such an integral part of our lives, was no longer just a part of the background. She was a central figure in our family, someone who had brought us closer, someone who had shown me what it meant to truly care for the people you loved. She had never expected anything in return. She didn't need praise or recognition. She simply did what needed to be done. But that was exactly why I had to make sure she knew her value. She had changed everything for us, and it was time for everyone to see that. The business, the wealth, the power. I had spent so much of my life building these things, but I was starting to realize they didn't define me. They didn't define my family. I was learning that now. And I had to make sure everyone understood that I wasn't going to let my empire, my success, or anyone's judgment come between me and my family. I called a meeting with some of my closest associates, the people I trusted the most, but who still hadn't fully grasped the changes I had been making. The ones who thought I was becoming distracted, who thought I was putting personal matters ahead of business. I knew this conversation wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. The decision I had made to step back from my role in the company was not just about giving up power. It was about finding balance, about learning to be more than just a businessman. I had to show them that I wasn't abandoning the company, but instead, I was choosing to prioritize what truly mattered. I sat at the head of the table, my hands resting on the cool surface, looking at the faces of the people who had once been so important to me. They didn't understand. They never would, unless I showed them. I know some of you are concerned about the changes I've made. I began, my voice calm but firm. But I need you to understand that this isn't about stepping away from responsibility. It's about being present where it counts most. I've spent too many years buried in work, ignoring the people who matter. That stops now. There was a silence in the room, one that hung heavy in the air. No one spoke, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They weren't ready for this. They had expected me to keep pushing, to keep striving for more, but that wasn't the man I was anymore. And I wasn't going to apologize for that. I'm still committed to this company, I continued, but I won't sacrifice my family for it. I've learned the hard way that the balance I thought I had isn't what I needed. I need to be the father my children deserve, and I need you all to understand that. A few of them nodded slowly, still uncertain, but starting to understand what I was saying. One of my business partners spoke up, his voice cautious but respectful. I get it, he said, but we've built this company together. We can't afford to lose focus. I nodded, acknowledging his concern. I'm not losing focus, I said. I'm redirecting it. I'm choosing to focus on what's truly important. And that's my family. The room fell silent again. I could feel the tension easing, but there was still resistance. I knew I had to push through it, for their sake and for mine. The changes in this company will be as strong as the changes in my life, I said. But I won't let anyone compromise my family. Not anymore. The meeting lasted a little longer, with a few more questions, a few more reservations, but by the end, I could tell something had shifted. My colleagues didn't understand fully, but they respected my decision. And that was enough for me. As I walked back to the house later that day, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I had made the decision, and I had faced the consequences of that decision. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't afraid. I had finally learned to prioritize the things that truly mattered. The kids were outside playing when I arrived home. I could hear their laughter from the driveway, and I smiled to myself. They were finally becoming the children I had always hoped they would be, open, trusting, and free. I walked into the house, feeling the weight of everything lifting. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. I walked into the living room, where the maid was sitting quietly, as always, by the window. She looked up as I entered, her expression calm, but filled with understanding. "How did it go?" she asked softly. I smiled at her, my heart full of gratitude. "It went well," I said. "I think they finally understand." She nodded, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something new in her eyes. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. She had known. This all along. She had known what I needed to see, what I needed to do, before I did. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't alone in this journey. I had never been alone. The real challenge was just beginning, but with her, and with my family, I felt ready for anything. I knew the moment I walked into that meeting that things were about to change forever. The world I had worked so hard to build, the empire that had defined me for so long, was now facing a reality I wasn't prepared for. But as I stood there, surrounded by colleagues and business partners, I realized that I had come to a crossroad. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It wasn't just about the deals, the numbers, or the growth. It was about my family, the people I loved and had neglected for so long, the ones who had been waiting for me to finally understand that there was more to life than just work. I had already made the decision to step back, but the moment of truth had arrived. There would be people in this room who wouldn't understand, who would see my choice as a betrayal of everything we had built together. But as the silence stretched out before me, I knew that this was a conversation I had to have. "We've been through a lot," I started, my voice steady, but firm. "The company, the team, the challenges, we've been successful. But there's something that I've realized over the last few weeks that I can't ignore anymore. I can't ignore my family. I can't ignore my role as a father." The room was quiet, every eye on me, and I could feel the weight of their expectations, their concerns, but I couldn't let that stop me. I wasn't here to explain myself or apologize. I was here to make a stand. I've spent so much of my life chasing success, thinking that if I could provide everything, if I could secure our future, everything would be fine. But I was wrong. The thing I've been missing is right in front of me, and it's my family. They are the ones who matter the most. I paused for a moment, looking at the faces of the people who had worked with me for years. Some looked confused, others skeptical. But there were a few who seemed to understand, who seemed to feel the same shift in the air that I had been feeling. This isn't easy. I know this company needs me, but I need them too. And I've come to realize that I can't do both. I need to be the father I should have always been. I need to be here for my children. The room fell into a heavy silence. My words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. I could see the wheels turning in their minds, processing what I had said. What does this mean for the company? One of my partners finally asked. His voice was cautious, but there was a hint of concern. It means that I'm stepping back, I said. Not permanently, but for now. I can't focus on the business the way I've been doing. I need to be present at home, with my children. They need me more than the company does right now. There was a murmur in the room, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncertain. But I stood firm. I'm not abandoning the company, I continued. I'm just adjusting my priorities. The future of this company is important, but I can't do it at the cost of my family. I've already lost too much time. My partner, who had been silent until now, stood up. You're making a big decision, he said. But I get it. Family comes first. It always should. He paused, looking around the room. We'll figure it out. We'll keep things moving forward. But you need to do what's right for you. His words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in a long while, I felt like people were starting to understand. Not just the business side of me, but the human side of me, the side that had been buried under years of pressure and responsibility. The meeting ended with the acknowledgement that things would be different, but that we would continue to move forward. There were changes to be made, adjustments in leadership, but the company was strong enough to survive without me at the helm every minute of every day. As I walked out of the meeting room, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the relief I expected, but it was something close. I had made the right decision. And now, it was time to prove it. When I returned home, the house was quieter than I had ever heard it. The children were upstairs, their laughter and energy filling the rooms. I walked into the kitchen to find the maid preparing dinner, the scent of a home-cooked meal filling the air. She looked up as I entered, a quiet calm in her eyes. How was the meeting? She asked, her voice steady. I smiled at her, knowing that she had been an unspoken part of this decision all along. It went well, I said. The company will be fine, but I've made my choice. I'm focusing on my family now. She smiled softly, a knowing look in her eyes. You've made the right choice, she said. They need you, just as much as you need them. Her words, so simple and so true, were the reminder I needed. This was the beginning of something new. A new chapter for all of us. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was someone who was ready to be present, to be there in every moment, for every challenge and every triumph. And for the first time, I felt ready to take on whatever came next. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with my family by my side, I knew it would be worth it. I had made my decision, but I wasn't prepared for how much harder it would be. The changes in my life were real, undeniable, and they had rippled through every aspect of my world. The company, the home, my family, they were all interconnected now in ways I hadn't fully realized until I took a step back. There was no going back, no erasing the choices I had made. And as the days passed, I knew it was time to take the next step. The weight of my decision had not only affected my work life, but also the people closest to me. The maid, who had once been just an employee in my house, had become a quiet, steady presence. But now, she was more than that. She had woven herself into the fabric of our lives, and it was clear to me that we all had to acknowledge it. No one had ever taken the time to see her for who she truly was. Not just the maid, not just the caretaker, but someone who had given so much of herself to help us rebuild what we had lost. She had quietly shown us the power of kindness, patience, and understanding. It was time for the rest of my family to see her the way I did. The days leading up to the dinner were filled with a quiet tension. I had asked the children to help me prepare a special evening, a moment to finally give thanks to the woman who had changed our lives. The twins were eager to help, excited about the opportunity to show the maid how much she meant to them. There were a few moments of awkwardness, especially with the maid. who still hadn't fully accepted that she was part of this new family dynamic. But I could see it in her eyes. She was starting to believe it, even if she wasn't sure how to fit into this new reality. As the evening approached, I could feel the anticipation building. I had called a family dinner, a moment where we would all sit together and finally acknowledge the changes we had been through. The maid, who had always been quiet, reserved, and so accustomed to the background, had never been the center of attention in the house. But tonight, that was going to change. We were all going to sit down at the table as equals, as a family. The twins set the table with care, placing the silverware in perfect order and lighting the candles. It was a simple dinner, but it felt different, as if we were all preparing ourselves for something more meaningful than just the food on the table. When the maid entered the dining room, she looked almost out of place in the moment, but as always, she carried herself with quiet grace. She paused for a moment, unsure of where to sit, but the children quickly made space for her. She smiled faintly, the uncertainty in her eyes slowly beginning to fade. It was a small gesture, but I could see how much it meant to her. I took my seat at the head of the table, looking around at the people who meant the most to me. This was no longer just about what we had built as a family. This was about acknowledging the love that had come from unexpected places, from people who had never asked for anything in return. I wanted to thank you all for being here tonight. I began, my voice calm but filled with emotion. For opening your hearts to change, and for being willing to grow together as a family. I know that the past few weeks have been difficult, and there's still so much to work through, but I'm proud of what we've built together. I looked directly at the maid, and I want to thank you for everything you've done for us. You've taught me more than I could ever have imagined, and you've shown us all what it means to truly care for each other. The room was silent for a moment. The children looked at each other, unsure of how to respond, but I saw the glimmer of understanding in their eyes. They were beginning to see it too. They were beginning to see the maid the way I did, not just as the woman who cleaned the house, but as someone who had given of herself selflessly, who had shown them the true meaning of family. The maid's expression softened, and she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't do it for thanks, she said quietly, but I could see the sincerity in her words. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Her humility was one of the reasons I had come to admire her so much. But I knew that she deserved to be seen, to be acknowledged for the change she had brought into our lives. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I know that the road ahead won't always be easy, I continued. But I want you to know that this is a family. All of us. And I don't want any of us to forget that. The maid looked at me, her eyes wide, and I could see the mix of emotions swirling in her expression. I knew this was hard for her. She wasn't used to being seen, to being appreciated for who she was. But I hoped that tonight, in this simple act of sitting together, she would begin to understand her place in our lives. As the evening continued, I could feel the distance between us starting to fade. The tension that had lingered in the house for so long was starting to evaporate. The twins laughed, sharing stories from their day, and for the first time, I saw them as a true family, not just a collection of people living in the same house, but a family bound together by love, respect, and understanding. The maid, too, began to relax. She smiled as the children talked, her posture softening as she began to join in the conversation. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a sign that things were changing. And for the first time, I felt like we were on the right path. The evening ended with laughter and warmth. We had shared a meal together, but it was more than just food. It was about healing, about connection, and about finding a new way forward. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but in that moment, I felt more certain than ever that this family, this new version of our family, was worth fighting for. And no matter what came next, we would face it together. I had thought that once the changes were made, everything would settle. The family dinners, the moments of connection, the heart-to-heart talks with the children, I believed they were enough to build a new foundation. But as the days wore on, I felt an unease that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about the world around us, the world that had started to see our transformation as something unfamiliar. There were whispers, rumors that we were becoming too soft, too distracted from the business that had once been our priority. And, in a strange way, the very people who had been with me through it all were now questioning my decisions. The very success I had worked so hard to build was now a reminder of what I stood to lose. The maid, who had played a crucial role in this entire transformation, had started to retreat. I could feel it. There was a distance in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was still there, still taking care of the children, still carrying the weight of the house, but she wasn't quite the same. She had always been a steady presence, someone who never needed anything from us. But now, it seemed like she was unsure of her place in this new dynamic. I couldn't let that happen. The bond we had created, the new life we had started, was fragile, and I needed to make sure it didn't fall apart. So, one afternoon, I decided to confront the unease. I couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't allow her to fade into the background again. I needed to tell her what she meant to me, what she meant to our family. The children were at school, and the house was quiet, filled only with the sounds of the wind rustling through the trees outside. I found her in the garden, where she was tending to the flowers, as always. She didn't hear me approach, and when she turned to see me standing there, she looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected me to come to her. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice soft but purposeful. She nodded and set down the tools she had been holding. "Of course, sir," she replied, her tone steady but cautious. We sat down on the bench beneath the large oak tree, the shade offering a moment of peace amidst the busy afternoon. "I've noticed that things have been a little different lately," I began. She didn't respond, but I could see the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided my gaze. "I can tell that something's bothering you," I said gently. She hesitated before speaking. "It's nothing, sir. I don't want to overstep. Things have changed, and I'm still trying to find my place in it all." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She had always been so self-assured, so steady, and to hear her speak like this was a wake-up call. I had taken her for granted, assuming that she would always be there, always knowing where she fit into our lives. But I hadn't considered how difficult it must be for her. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was part of the family, but she had never been given the space to truly feel that way. "You are part of this family," I said, my voice low and sincere. "You've been more than that for a long time. You've been the one to guide us, to help me see things I was blind to. I don't know how to express how much that means to me." Her eyes softened, but she still looked unsure. "I never wanted recognition, sir," she said, almost as if to justify her own humility. "I've always done what I could to help. But it's hard to accept something I never thought I deserved." I reached out and placed my hand on hers, the gesture more for my own reassurance than anything else. "You deserve to be seen, truly seen, for everything you've done. You've changed this family, and you've changed me. I couldn't have made it through this transformation without you." The silence between us stretched, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if the words had bridged the gap between us, allowing the distance to close. Finally, she looked up at me, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but full of meaning. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't just about telling her how important she was. It was about making sure she knew it, that she truly understood that she was an equal in this new family we were building. As the evening approached, I thought about everything we had been through. The business was still a part of me, still something I had to manage, but it no longer defined who I was. The real work, the most important work, was at home with the people who mattered most. My children, the maid, they had all become the center of my world, and I couldn't imagine ever going back to the way things were before. The children came home later, and the house seemed to come alive with their energy. We gathered for dinner, just the four of us, and it felt so normal, so right, that I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, and the world outside would continue to push its expectations onto us. But for the first time, I was certain of one thing: I wasn't alone. I had a family, a real family, and we would face whatever came next together. That was worth more than any business deal, any corporate success. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready for it. I woke up the next morning feeling like I was in a dream, but it was one I didn't want to end. The changes I had fought for, the transformation that had taken place in my life, were starting to feel real. The house was still quiet in the way that mornings should be. There was a sense of peace in the air, but it was still fragile, as if we were all walking on the edge of something. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had come to understand that the true power of this family, the thing that had kept us together, was love and respect. It It was about being there for each other when it mattered most, and showing up when things got tough. The maid, who had been the foundation of this transformation, was sitting quietly by the window, her presence as steady as ever. She had become more than just a caregiver. She had become a part of this family in every way that mattered. But as I stood there in the morning light, I knew that I still had a lot to prove, not just to her, but to the world around us. There were still people who didn't understand. My colleagues, my business partners, the people who had built this empire with me. None of them knew what it had been like. None of them had seen the transformation that had happened inside these walls. They hadn't seen what the maid had done for us. They hadn't witnessed the quiet strength she had shown, the patience she had given, and the love she had poured into this family. I had to show them. The meeting with my business partners had been difficult, but it had been necessary. I had made it clear that my family came first, but now I had to follow through on that promise. The business still needed me, but I was no longer the man I had been. I had to find a new way to balance everything. But no matter what happened next, I knew I couldn't go back. The old ways had left me hollow, empty. I had thought success and wealth were the answers, but I had been wrong. What I needed, what we all needed, was connection. It wasn't enough to just provide. It wasn't enough to just be present physically. I had to show up emotionally. I had to let my family see that I was in this with them, no matter what the future held. I spent the morning with the twins. They were more playful, more open, than they had been in years. We spent time in the garden, playing games and talking. And for the first time, I felt like I was really with them. The silence that had once existed between us was gone. They were no longer afraid to talk to me, to share their thoughts. And it was in those moments, those quiet moments of connection, that I realized how much I had missed. The house was slowly becoming a home, a place filled with laughter and love. Later in the afternoon, I took a walk outside, alone, as I often did when I needed to think. The air was warm, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground. The sound of the children's laughter echoed in the distance, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. I felt free. I had made the decision to step back, to focus on what truly mattered, and now, I was finally starting to understand what that meant. I wasn't just building a legacy anymore. I was building a life. But the world outside, the business world, hadn't stopped. There were still people watching, waiting for me to fail. And there were still moments when I questioned whether I had made the right choice. The doubts crept in at night, when everything was still. But every time I looked at my children, at the woman who had taught me what it meant to be a real father, I knew I was on the right path. The next day, I called the maid into the living room. She entered quietly, her usual calm presence filling the space. But I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She hadn't fully accepted her place in this new family dynamic, and I could understand why. She had always been the one giving, the one taking care of everyone else. But now, I needed to make sure she knew how important she was to us. I need you to understand something, I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable, but I could see the faintest trace of fear in her eyes. You've always been more than just the maid here, I continued. You're part of this family. I want you to know that. You've given us so much, more than I could ever repay. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me. I could see that she didn't know how to respond. She had never been one to accept praise or gratitude, and that was something I had never truly understood until now. It's not just about what you've done for us, I said softly. It's about who you are, and I want you to know that you matter to us, just as much as anyone else in this house. The maid blinked, her eyes filling with something I couldn't quite read. It wasn't shock, but it was something close to it. She had always been so humble, so selfless, that I had never thought to tell her how much I appreciated her. And now, I could see how much it meant to her. She had never asked for anything in return. But that didn't mean she didn't deserve it. I don't need thanks, she said quietly, almost apologetically. I've just done what needed to be done. I shook my head. You've done more than that. You've helped me become a better father. You've helped us all find our way back to each other. She looked down, a small smile tugging at her lips. I never expected to hear that, she said softly. And in that moment, I realized that this was the start of something new. Not just for me, but for all of us. We were finally learning how to truly be a family, how to love, how to care, and how to be there for one another, no matter the circumstances. The maid wasn't just the caretaker anymore. She was one of us. and I was finally ready to show her that she belonged here, with us, for good. I woke up the following morning with a sense of clarity I had not felt in years. The house was quieter than usual, and for the first time in a long while, the silence felt comforting. It was a new kind of peace, a peace that had settled into the walls of our home since the changes we had made together. The twins had begun to trust me again, their once wary eyes now full of affection. We had found a rhythm in our lives that I had never imagined possible, and I could see the change in them. But as much as I had tried to step away from the world I had known, this relentless cycle of business, success, and the drive for more, I realized that the journey ahead was far from over. The world outside was still watching, still judging, and the doubts had not entirely gone away. The business, though I had taken a step back from it, was still there. People still expected results, still expected the success I had once been so obsessed with. And then there was the maid, who had been the steady presence in our lives. She had quietly woven herself into the fabric of our family, but even now, I could sense the weight of uncertainty in her eyes. She had never truly belonged to the world I came from, and I had asked her to make space for herself in a family that was still figuring out what it meant to be a family. I knew that I needed to make sure she felt seen, truly seen, for the role she had played. She had become more than just a caregiver. She had become a teacher, a guide, and a member of our family. She had taught me what it meant to be vulnerable, to open myself up and embrace the discomfort of change. But I also knew that the work wasn't over. It was time to solidify this new foundation, to ensure that this new family dynamic wasn't just something we spoke about, but something we lived every day. The decision to move away from my previous role in the company wasn't just about changing my work life. It was about changing how I viewed the world. I had been so focused on what I could build with my own hands that I had neglected what truly mattered. I was building my family, my relationships, but I hadn't been fully present in any of them. The maid, who had watched from the sidelines for so long, was now a part of this transformation. And so was I. We had all been through so much, and now it was time to solidify our place in each other's lives. The next few weeks were filled with adjustments. There were still meetings to attend, emails to answer, and business decisions to make. But they no longer consumed my days. They no longer defined who I was. I had found a new rhythm with the twins, a rhythm that involved less time on my phone or in meetings and more time at the dinner table, in the garden, on walks, and in conversations that actually mattered. I started seeing them for who they were becoming, rather than who I thought they should be. They weren't just the children I had once bought toys for and sent off to private tutors. They were becoming real people, with real emotions and dreams of their own. And they needed me to be part of that, to be present in the way that really mattered. The maid, still so quiet and humble in her ways, had become someone who spoke freely now. She had a voice in our home, and it was a voice I had come to respect deeply. I could see her growing in confidence, too, as she learned to navigate this new dynamic. She wasn't just a caretaker anymore. She was a partner in this family, and I had to make sure she knew that. It wasn't just about what she did for us. It was about who she was, and the role she played in making us all better. One evening, as I sat in the living room with the twins, I realized just how far we had come. The house was warm, the laughter of the children filling the air, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like home. There were still challenges to face, still external pressures and doubts that lingered. But in this moment, in this room, I felt like we were stronger than ever. The twins were still talking and playing, and for the first time, I didn't feel the pull of the business world trying to claim my attention. I was there, truly there, in this moment with them. I could feel the change in the air. There was no more hiding. There was no more pretending. The transformation we had gone through had come to a point where it was impossible to ignore anymore. The maid, who had been so reserved in the beginning, was now sitting with us, smiling at the children as they laughed. She had finally found her place here, in this home, in this family. I walked over to her, my heart full, and sat next to her. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You've helped us in ways I can't even begin to explain." She looked at me, a soft smile on her face. "I didn't do it for thanks," she replied, but her voice was filled with warmth and something deeper, recognition, I realized. She had finally understood that she was a part of this, a part of us. The weight that had once seemed so heavy was beginning to lift, piece by piece. The pressure of living up to expectations, the fear of failure, The worry about how others viewed me. It was all fading. I wasn't just a businessman anymore. I wasn't just a father. I was part of something real. And I wasn't going to let anything take that away from me. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The journey was far from over, but I knew we had made something solid, something worth fighting for. My family, the people who had been by my side through this transformation, had shown me the true meaning of love and connection. And no matter what the future held, we would face it together. I woke up the following morning with a feeling I hadn't had in a long time, a sense of calm, of knowing that things were finally on the right track. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm golden light over the mansion, and for the first time, the space felt like home. The kids were upstairs, and I could hear their voices carrying down the hall, laughing as they prepared for another day. They weren't just going through the motions anymore. They were living, they were thriving, and they were doing it with me. That realization filled me with a quiet pride. The maid, who had become an integral part of our lives, had transformed not only the way we live, but the way I viewed myself. I had spent so much of my life working, building, accumulating, believing that success was the end goal. But what I had discovered through her, and through my children, was that true success wasn't about the things you accumulate. It was about the people you connect with and the love you share. It was about the moments you create together. I walked downstairs, the house still quiet, but somehow warmer, more inviting. The maid was in the kitchen, as usual, preparing breakfast for the children. She looked up when she saw me, a faint smile on her lips, but there was a certain calmness to her now, an ease that hadn't been there before. She no longer looked like she was just going through the motions, performing a duty. She looked like she belonged. "Good morning, sir," she greeted me softly, her voice warm but steady. I smiled in return, but I didn't say anything right away. I had spent so much time thinking about the changes I had made, the changes we had made as a family, but I hadn't fully acknowledged how much she had contributed to it. "I wanted to talk," I said, walking toward her. She paused, but only for a moment, before continuing with what she was doing. She didn't seem nervous or uncertain anymore. She was comfortable in her own skin. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her eyes never leaving her task. I took a deep breath, unsure of how to express everything I had been feeling. "I've been thinking a lot about what you've done for us. About what you've done for me." I started, my voice thick with emotion. "You've shown me what really matters. You've taught me how to be present, how to really be here for my children, for this family." She looked up then, her expression softening. "You don't have to thank me, sir. I've just been doing what I thought was right," she said, almost as if she was brushing off the compliment. But I knew it wasn't just about doing what was right. It was about how she had done it, how she had shown up, day after day, without ever asking for anything in return. "It's not just about doing what's right," I said, walking a little closer. "You've given us something we didn't even realize we needed. I couldn't have learned what it means to truly be a father without you." She didn't speak for a moment, but her eyes seemed to brighten, as if she hadn't fully expected me to say those words. "I never expected to hear that from you," she said, her voice quieter now, full of something like disbelief. "I didn't do it for you to say thanks. I just did it because it felt like the right thing to do." I nodded, my heart swelling with appreciation. I had never realized how much of a difference a person like her could make. Her quiet presence had been the steady force that had held us all together, even when we didn't know how to hold ourselves. "I know," I said gently, "but that's the point. You did it because it was the right thing. And it's made all the difference in the world." There was a brief silence between us, and I could feel something shifting in the air. It was a moment of understanding, a moment of acknowledgement. She had always done what needed to be done, but now, she knew that we saw her, really saw her, for who she was and what she had done. "I appreciate everything you've done," I continued, my voice steady but full of emotion. "And I want you to know that you're a part of this family. I don't just mean in the way you help us. I mean in every way that counts. You belong here. You always have." She nodded slowly, a quiet smile spreading across her face. It wasn't a big smile, but it was genuine, and I could see the relief in her eyes. For the first time, I felt like she was truly accepting the place she had in our lives. And that made all the difference. Later that evening, as we sat down to dinner together, the warmth in the room felt different. It wasn't just the food, or the laughter of the children, or the fact that we were all gathered together. It was something deeper, a a sense of belonging, a sense of connection that had been missing for so long. The maid, who had always quietly done her part, was now an active participant in our family's life. She was no longer just the one who took care of everything. She was part of the conversations, part of the laughter, and part of the love that filled the room. And as we ate, as we talked and joked together, I realized that this was what I had been missing all along. The money, the success, the empire, it had all been empty without this. Without these moments, without the people who mattered most. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally living the life I had always wanted, not just for myself, but for my children, for the maid, for all of us. The journey was far from over, but I knew that together, we could face whatever came next. And no matter what, we would face it as a family. I stood in the doorway, watching the children laugh as they ran across the garden, the sun casting its golden glow over everything. It had been months since I had made the decision to focus on what truly mattered, and now, I could see the results of that choice. The shift wasn't just in my own heart, but in the hearts of my family. The house no longer felt empty, no longer felt like a place where people simply existed. It felt like home. The maid, who had been at the heart of everything, was no longer just a presence in the background. She was an equal in our lives, a member of this family. I had realized how much she had contributed, not just to the physical care of the house, but to the emotional growth of all of us. She had been a guide, a mentor, and in so many ways, the foundation of the change we had undergone. But now, as I watched the children and her interact, I realized that the true test of this transformation was not just in how we saw each other, but in how we would continue to live in the future. Life was always going to have challenges. There would be moments of doubt, moments where the old habits crept in. But I knew we had something stronger now, something that couldn't be easily broken. The children were growing, learning, and trusting, and I was finally the father they deserved. The maid, our constant source of wisdom and compassion, was no longer someone I had to protect. She had found her place here, in our family, and I could see the confidence in her eyes. We had all found our place. It wasn't easy. The world outside still didn't understand, still didn't appreciate the choices I had made. My business world, the empire I had built, still had expectations, still had people who doubted me. But I had already made the decision. And now, nothing was going to make me turn back. That evening, as we gathered for dinner once again, the feeling of contentment in the room was palpable. The maids set the table, the children chatted excitedly about their day, and I felt a warmth fill me that had been absent for too long. For the first time, I wasn't concerned about the future in the same way I had been before. The future wasn't about numbers, deals, or success at any cost. The future, now, was about us. About this family we were building, brick by brick. As we sat down to eat, I looked around the table. The twins, who had once been so reserved, were now full of life, laughing and sharing their stories. The maid, who had always been a quiet observer, was now an active participant in our conversations, her smile steady and genuine. I realized that we were no longer living in separate worlds. My business, their lives, the maid's role. We had finally become a family. And in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. I wasn't just a provider anymore. I wasn't just a businessman. I was a father, a partner, a part of something bigger than any success I had ever imagined. The road ahead wasn't going to be without its struggles, but I knew now that we had the strength to face whatever came our way. The children were no longer scared to talk to me. The maid was no longer a stranger in our own home. We had each other, and that was enough. I looked at my children, their faces full of hope, and I knew that this was just the beginning of something beautiful. We weren't perfect. We would make mistakes, but we would make them together, and that was what mattered. As the evening wound down, the children went off to bed, their laughter still echoing in the halls. I found myself sitting alone for a moment, taking it all in. The peace, the love, the quiet joy of being truly present with the people I cared about most. It was more than I had ever imagined. And as I sat there, I realized that the empire I had once fought so hard to build wasn't as important as the family I had almost lost. The house no longer felt like a monument to my success. It felt like a home, a place where everyone, no matter who they were, was welcomed, loved, and appreciated. And as I sat in the stillness of the evening, I knew I had everything I had ever wanted. I wasn't just living for myself anymore. I was living for them. And that was the greatest success of all. This powerful story delves into the heart of transformation, where a father, through the quiet guidance of a selfless woman, learns the true meaning of family and connection. In this compelling narrative, the journey of rediscovery touches on the themes of vulnerability, love, and emotional growth, all framed within the context of Black stories that highlight resilience and change. The story unfolds within a wealthy family, where the father, caught in the pursuit of business success, realizes the cost of neglecting those he loves. The maid, an often overlooked figure in Black stories, becomes a pivotal character, teaching him that what truly matters is not success, but the relationships we nurture. Through these events, the family's dynamic shifts, leading to moments of healing and understanding that are often seen in Black stories of perseverance and redemption. This transformation is not just about the father and his children, but about how an entire family, through kindness, acceptance, and a shared commitment to growth, can rewrite its narrative. In this heartfelt journey, the bond between the father and his children deepens as he becomes more present in their lives, learning from the experiences and values taught by the maid. The story brings forth the beauty and strength found in Black stories, showing how love and compassion can change everything. By the end, the family is stronger than ever, united by the lessons of togetherness and mutual respect. This touching tale is a reminder that Black stories are not just about hardship, but about the power of love to transform and heal, reminding us that true success is measured not by what we acquire, but by who we become.